Okay, welcome to chapter 42 of the practices book. This is about print services on page 749. You know, for years we've been hearing about the paperless office. And I'm sorry, that's just a joke. That just does not exist. You know, in the day, they were talking about, you need to shut down all these printers and, have all this stuff on the web and blah, 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 blah. And therefore, you don't need to be printing things. I'm sorry. I can tell that the amount of paper being used at the office is not going down. It's going up. Every year, people are using more paper than they did the year before. So this whole concept of a paperless office, that's just a fantasy. Okay, so they start talking about the introduction here. So printing is considered like a utility. You don't need to know anything about it. It's just there when you need it, and when you need it, and that's about it. It's just got to work. That's all there is to it. It starts with a policy. The policy basically means, where do we put the printers? How many printers do we get? What kind of printers do we get? Does everyone get a color printer? And then you design the scenario. Then you design where you're going to put them and how you're going to configure them and all the rest of that stuff. So you start with a consistent policy. On page 750, they talk about the level of centralization. In a perfect world, wouldn't it be nice if everyone had a $2,000 or $3,000 super duper color printer with all the bells and whistles? Wouldn't that be nice? Everyone had one on their desk? Woohoo! That'd be cool. It's just not practical. There's just not enough money in the world to do that. So the only people who really get stuff at their desk are those people who printing confidential stuff that I cannot print. How about someone's disciplinary report on a printer that's down the hall, and I have to get up and wander down the hall to pick that up and hope that no one else has seen it sitting in the paper tray before I got there? Okay, so there's a few scenarios where you need your own printer, but not many. Okay, so yes, it's too expensive, but very convenient if you had your own. So how about one big printer in, some room, relatively small room? Yeah, there's some trade-offs here, right? The big printer would handle, by the way, small printers that you buy, like at Best Buy, typically have a paper tray that holds like 100 sheets of paper. You think they did that on purpose? Yeah, they really did. When you buy big printers, they hold an entire ream of paper, okay, at a time. That's how you can tell if it's an office printer or a personal printer. It's the size of the paper tray. Okay. So, yes, it is a trade-off. I mean, that does mean if I'm printing sensitive documents, I kind of have to be paying attention. You don't print off the CEO compensation guide and leave it in the printer for a couple of days, right? Okay, good. So, the cost of printers. In the old days, the printers were expensive and toner cartridges were relatively cheap. That's not the way it is now. In fact, HP does a fantastic job of basically giving the printers away. You can get a dang good printer for like $50 or $60. But the ink costs $50 or $60. Okay, so they're making their money. Okay, but they're making it through supplies. Okay. So mostly ink nowadays, right? I don't see that many laser printers except for like big things. Laser printers are very fast. If you want to do fast printing, like a corporate printer kind of a scenario, yeah, you're in good shape. Anyway, so how much does paper cost these days? Is it going up? Well, everything's going up, but who pays for it? Does every office have to chip in? I mean, if let's say you had a floor that had a giant printer in the middle of the floor. This is the accounting department. Here's the engineering department. Do you share the cost of the ink and the paper, or do you have maybe a little counter on the device that tells who's using the printer? You could go down a rabbit hole here, right? Okay. Part of the problem is there's just too many printers out there. I mean, too many vendors and brands and models. There's a gazillion device drivers that you would have to install. Okay? Now, plug and play is designed so that, I plug in a USB printer in the back of my computer, and my computer says, hey, I see you got a brand new device. Would you like me to go get that thing? And depending on how you're set up, you might have the permissions to do that, maybe. But in most scenarios, particularly if it's over the network, you're going to have an administrator help with the setting up of the additional drivers, okay? So, HP produces like a new, I'm making these numbers up because, I don't know anything about HP, but, they probably come up with like a new printer, like, I don't know, every, I don't know, 9 months, 12 months, right? If you buy a printer at Best Buy today, you come in, by Christmas time, that model won't be there. It's gone. It's no longer exists. So they retire home-based ones at about 1 to 2 year cycle. And, if you try to get a brand new Windows 10 or 11 driver for a 4-year-old printer, you're probably going to have a problem. Now, it's not that this stuff just is too difficult to do. It's marketing. Why on earth would, I'm going to pick on HP. Why on earth would HP support your brand new Windows 11 with a driver for a printer that's 5 years old? What would be their advantage? Home-based, okay? Because they really want to say, no, you need to go buy another printer. Planned obsolescence. Okay, so let's talk about printer architecture on page 751. So how many users can share a printer without it causing problems? Well, you kind of have to know the volume, right? And, in the old days, we had a header sheet that would come up. So when something popped out, you couldn't tell who it belonged to, right? But if you had a header sheet come up first, you go, this belongs to Bob, and you could just take it out of the printer tray and set it on the table. So when Bob came to get it, he could find his own stuff. So that little first header sheet, excellent idea. Okay, so one more time, who gets a personal printer? Well, it's people who are going to be printing confidential stuff, so I don't have to. So HR people, things like that. You don't have to run down the hall. How about the number of pages? Is there kind of a limit there? Like, for example, if I have my own office, it's probably going to be like, a home-based printer in my office, okay? And have the big monster printer in the hallway, okay? Who's responsible for ordering supplies? Somebody, somewhere, has to keep those toner cartridges or ink cartridges and paper. How about this? I had a scenario where this guy happened to be in a cube next to the network printer. Okay, it wasn't even hooked up to his computer. It was just hooked directly to the network itself. But he just happened to be the closest person to the printer. And then somebody would say, "Hey man, the printer ran out of paper. How come you didn't fill it up?" And he goes, "That's not my job. I mean, just because I'm the one who's closest to it does not mean that I'm the guy who's going to be unjamming it and putting in new paper and replacing the ink cartridges or toner cartridges. That's not my job, just because I'm the guy who's physically closest." So you could have some wars, some printer wars going on here about, I'm sorry, your printer ran out of paper, but that ain't my responsibility. And do you let your own customers change the toner and ink cartridges? I feel comfortable doing that, but I know a lot of people who would not. When my mom says, "Hey man, I got a little note saying my cartridge is low," I go, "No problem, Mom, I'll come over and do it." I'm not going to have her, open up the thing and pull out the ink cartridge and, peel the tape off the new one and slap it in and close it up and have it print a sample sheet. I'm not going to have her do that. So what about the specifications? If I'm trying to print and I want to find one that does duplex printing, I probably need a way of saying, "Hey, show me all printers that show duplex," or show me all the ones that do color, maybe even ones that do stapling. Okay, that would be kind of cool, right? All right. And so most people have like a recommendation for a small printer, medium printer, and a large printer. I'm not talking brands, but what the features and capabilities are. And so that, hey, I need a small printer, they go to the list. Okay, kind of makes sense. Now let's talk about printer access. Is there a chargeback system, where each organization gets charged? I know, for example, at the university, if you go up to the Xerox machine and you want to make a bunch of copies, you have to type in a 4-digit code, which is the code for your office, and so therefore they know how many copies you made and who to charge them to, because every office is given a pot of money to support the Xerox machine. So if there is a chargeback system, there's going to have to be some sort of a code. It could be done completely electronically. All print jobs from this office, this office, this office, this office automatically get charged to this one system. I'm not talking about home printers, but office printers can do that. And so how do you manage and cancel print jobs? Is there going to be a person who has the authority to go to the print queue and go, whoa, I need to be higher priority than that. I'm going to boop that up. Boop, 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 boop. So mine comes out first. Or to cancel a print job. If I walk up physically to the printer, can I push the buttons and make that happen? Who has the permissions? So what about remote printing? Show me the list of all printers that exist. Now, this could be a problem. Let me give you an example. We had a scenario where we had a plotter, one of those gargantuan things for like doing blueprints, and it was down for a while, and so it disappeared off of the list of printers because it was going to be down for maintenance. And so this one guy says, hey, I need to print to the plotter. So he brought up the list of plotters, found the one he wanted, hit the button, and he was printing to a plotter in a different state. So, the guys in Oregon are looking at it going, who the hell printed this? What is this? So, yeah, you really got to be paying attention. When you say, give me a list of all color printers or plotters, you've got to be located. It's going to have a description that tells you where it is. Okay? Let me just tell you that. All right. So, the printer name basically has to say, where am I? Okay, the room number, even what state I'm in. Okay, so here is a likely scenario. Somebody comes up and says, it didn't print. I can't find my stuff. I printed it 3 times and it never came out. What's the most likely problem? Is it the printer's offline or, it's something wrong? No. The most likely problem is they sent it to the wrong printer. And so somebody upstairs, 3 floors up, has got 4 copies of this document that they don't want because you accidentally sent it to the wrong dang printer. That's real life, guys. The first time someone says, I sent it to a shared printer and it didn't print, I'd go, show me what printer you used. And that way, these names have to make sense. They've got to tell them where it is. And in fact, we always included like the person's name that was closest to it, going back to that story about the printer wars, the person who's physically close to it. So let's say I have an awful lot to print, and I don't want to, I know the cost of my color printer, and it's pretty dang expensive per page. So maybe you want to just make a PDF of this and take it down to an honest-to-God commercial printer downtown and say, hey, could you print me 100 copies of this really quick? Maybe they can put some binding on it and all sorts of cool stuff. And most of these can be done over the web. You just send them a PDF and say, I want 100 of these. And then I'll come pick them up, or you can deliver them. You don't even actually go to the store to get them going. So for large print jobs, that kind of makes sense. So documentation, page 754. Yeah, you're probably going to need to have a little bit of, how to do this. How to select a printer. How do you turn on duplex, and how do you select this? Those kind of things. And then the list of printers. What to include. From that naming convention, because they may see the printer in the executive office. But for God's sake, I don't want to print there, right? Okay, just say. Labels. When you walk up to the printer, I think I'm printing to HP number 402. When I walk up to the printer, it better say HP 402. Okay? All right, so, hey, we're coming up on the 15-minute mark.